If you want to know what's going on and what's important to the industry as a whole, there's nothing like attending these meetings with your competitors 360 days of the year. But at these 5 days, they're your colleagues.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. And back for another episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast with a topic that may sound like a bit of a sleeper, but I think is really important and is going to surprise people with the insights and wisdom we're going to get today. And that is, how can industrial manufacturers actually maximize their trade association memberships and relationships? Joining me today to tackle that topic is a longtime Industrial Trade Association executive, Stephen Sears. Stephen is the CEO and Executive Director of EMA, which is the EIFS Industry Members Association. He's been in that role since 2021, middle of 2021. Prior to that, he was a 17-year veteran of the Brick Industry Association and held a number of progressive roles in marketing and member services, and eventually was the COO. Before working in building materials and trade associations, he worked in various Manhattan-based ad agencies, kind of the madman, I guess. And then that actually followed several appointed positions in the administration of President George H.W. Bush, including a political appointment at the U.S. Department of Labor. He's a graduate of Washington Lee University. He holds an MBA from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke. And here's maybe the craziest fact. I met Stephen, I think, probably in 1975. So here we are a half a century later having this conversation. I hope that you find this conversation worth sharing with others. Please, drop a comment, subscribe, do that sort of thing. And so with that, welcome, Stephen. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Ed, and thank you very much for that very nice introduction. And I can say that you are still recognizable from 1975, while I myself am not. But in any event, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and I look forward to it.
I'm looking forward to this. All right, so we're coming off a busy trade show season, a time that many trade associations are quite active, at least, they're active, engaged with members. I'm sure they're active and busy all the time. But my experience is that every person or every company tends to think of associations in just one or two dimensions. It may be, industry certifications or market research or organizing industry events or advocacy or workforce training and development or the buying group benefits or health insurance access or international trade missions. And I'm sure there's many that I haven't even thought of, but you're inside the beast. Mm-hmm. As you describe it, as you see the world, what is the role of a trade association?
Oh, gosh, I would say the classical definition of a trade association, we go way back to 1913 when we became a business league. And that was the tax-exempt terminology defined by the U.S. Department of Treasury and the IRS. And essentially, we are a tax-exempt organization that its whole role and mission is to help advocate and do things for industries that they either won't or can't do for themselves. And the key there is the word industry. So our role is to help the industry at large. We are not legally allowed to help individual members or, bring back net profits back to members or back to staffers or anything like that. So we range from a whole bunch of different, trade associations range from, you could, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is one. We have a 501c6 designation, the National Association of Realtors, and that goes in the Chamber of Commerce and your state, local chapters are 501c6 organizations as well. My favorite to bring up is the National Football League, which was a 501c6 until 2015. I think people started to get the fact that they were just making so much so much money that they couldn't hold on to that.
Right.
Our role is to help the EIFS industry, exterior insulation and finish systems. And what EIFS is, it's people refer to it as insulated stucco. It's much more than that. But if you've been to Las Vegas any time in your life or in the past 30 years, EIFS is on just about every single casino that you've seen that's been built in the last 30 years. And it can look most commonly like stucco, but it can look like other things too. It can look like brick, stone, wood, even metal panel, or a combination of materials. And it's also on every Hampton Inn and lots of kind of mid-range hospitality properties all over the country as well. So our job is to help members do many things that they typically can't or won't do for themselves. So we do many of the things that you mentioned. We do a collection of industry statistics. We support industry certification. And we also, we do advocacy. And advocacy for a building materials trade association entails two things. Yes, you have your federal, state, and local. State and local probably mean more to us than the federal in most cases, but we also have building codes. That's a huge part of our advocacy, if not the biggest, because one of the things about building codes that people may not know is that building codes, they're consensus developed guidelines, and they're not brought down from high and required. You can have a building code pass at a national level. They call it a model building code, but a state and a locale can decide to adopt it or not. So it makes it kind of tricky. We have two primary building codes, but you have thousands of codes setting and approving jurisdictions around the country. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
And I'm sure that for many listeners of this podcast, maybe that are industrial manufacturers in other spaces, there are similar kind of code issues that they may not even be aware of, their association working on their behalf to try to resolve or simplify or clarify or codify or whatever the case may be.
Oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. Especially for industrial manufacturers. They have to deal with the Environmental Protection Agency a lot, and they have to deal with the U.S. Department of Labor. They have to deal with the U.S. Department of Energy, Commerce, a whole host of different things. And it's not just the agencies, but it's frequently the administrations underneath them, and many of them have state-run bodies too.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most overlooked value that trade associations provide that members just somehow don't appreciate or don't realize?
I think the networking aspect is absolutely huge. We just had our own fall board and council meetings a couple of days ago in Atlanta. And we're not a huge industry. We're a subset of the stucco industry. That's how people categorize us. So we had about 50 people at our meetings, which they comprise our councils and our board of directors, or our working groups and board of directors. But you have the leaders of the industry. So, and the great thing with our membership, we range from major corporate Fortune 500 manufacturers like Dow is on our board, Georgia Pacific is a member, and then we've got some multinational building products companies like Sika they're a huge concern based in Switzerland, but then we've got local contractors, and they pay a much more modest fee, at $750 fee to join our association, but they get supplied from these groups. And it's a great opportunity for them, the forward-thinking ones, you could be a contractor in a local area. All of a sudden, you're meeting the CEO of an EIFS manufacturer. Wow. And then you're having a drink with them or having dinner with them or attending a meeting with them. And that kind of input is just huge. And yeah, I noticed that the hotel bar, after our meetings took place after day one, it was buzzing. And it's that whole networking aspect that I think is absolutely it's just huge. And
of course, unlocking the potential of networking means you got to get off your ass and go to the meetings.
Correct. You do have to get off your ass and go to the meetings. There's no question about that.
And I assume there's probably a typical Pareto distribution across a trade association membership that we see everywhere else in society, that 20% of the companies actually engage and 80% of them just spectate and wonder why they're not getting more value.
Exactly. And a lot of times, and this isn't unique to us, I think it's unique to many associations, if not most. If people, you have to invest in the association if you want to get something out of it. And it's not just paying your dues and writing a check.
Right.
It's actually, you have to read the materials that we distribute, and you have to attend the meetings and go ahead and join a working group if that's what you want to do. In fact, we encourage it. And I think that's when the magic happens, when people see that kind of thing going on.
All right. I'm going to come at that topic from a lot of different angles as we're talking. I think that there's no doubt that being engaged is the key to extracting value, but a lot of people think about that different ways. So I'm going to keep coming back to that.
Fair enough.
I assume that you must be a member of some association for association execs or something like that. At a high level, what trends are associations tracking right now that might be really helpful for members or potential members to know about, to understand kind of this is how associations are evolving?
So I think associations are evolved. I'll answer it this way. I think associations have evolved over the past few decades. We know we have to have a very strong value proposition. And it's not, it's gone are the days when a company would join an association out of duty to the industry. Okay. That's gone. You still maybe have some very traditional minded people who do that, but you have to have a value proposition because, the tax benefit that we have for our members is we're a business expense. Okay. But you can have just as good of a business expense if you take out a client for lunch. Right. So we're a business expense. And so we have to have something that they can't get anywhere else. And
that has substantial value.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if we're not doing something that is of value, we should dump it, frankly. And I think that's a new mentality for many associations, that they have to be mindful of what their members' concerns are. That's another thing entirely. The way we collect our dues, like many associations, we base our dues largely on last year's revenues of our members. So the funny thing with an association is that we're a year behind, okay, as far as, market conditions and things like that. So so we move slowly, which can be a frustrating thing, because the other thing that we have to think about too is how do we enact value when we move slowly, we're a year behind economically, and we're literally herding cats, because we have a situation where I have a bunch of company executives who are in a room, and they can, back at their home company, they can issue a directive from on high and it gets followed or heads roll. Can't do that in an association. And consensus building is the order of the day. Now, I'm very, very lucky because with my association members, they get that. They get that, which is great. And the board of directors absolutely gets that. So, but the pressure that puts on us is that we have to keep searching and searching and searching for ways to provide value that's gonna help our members. Because if we don't, what's the point?
So generationally and societally, there are these trends of less engagement with civic organizations. Mm-hmm. You think about the book Bowling Alone, mm-hmm. and the issue that many the local civic organizations, even chambers of commerce, the veterans organizations, are all struggling, trying to get people to engage the way they just naturally and instinctively did 20 years ago, and much less so today. Yeah. How are associations wrestling with that?
So, well, I can tell you what we have done, and you can thank COVID for this, which you hate to say thank COVID for anything, but I think what COVID has taught the business world to do is that there are certain things that you can do, and you don't have to be the office necessarily to do them. So we absolutely take of venues like this, for example, to conduct meetings, and that's very, very important. The internet has been very helpful. We're able to publish materials and get the word out on important matters very, very quickly, mm-hmm. if need be. And that's really important. So those are two things right away that I can think of that we've done to help address that. But at the same time, I will say this, it kind of harkens back to, classical anything, like with education. You can learn the latest tricks on computer science and engineering, but you have to learn how to read, write, and do arithmetic. And for us, I think having that face-to-face value on a deliberate basis, on a regular basis, is as important as it's ever been, if not even more so. And so actually, we actually went a little counter. We actually only used to meet as a wide membership body once a year. And since I come on board, now we do it twice a year. So we used to only have an annual meeting in the March, April timeframe. And now we have that annual meeting in March and April. And now we have our working groups and board meeting in November. And that is deliberate and by design. And I think the members see value out of that. Because that face-to-face approach is just something that we need to do. But there has to be a reason to do it.
Sure.
You can't just, and it does put pressure on the staff. You have to deliver content that's going to matter to them, and that's going to give them an opportunity to say what they want to say. Because the one thing I can also say is it's not going to be helpful to anybody if we come to a meeting and all that happens during the meetings is the association staff just reports out what great things they did over the past 6 months.
You can mail everybody a binder. Yeah,
you can just mail everybody a binder. I continuously learn. I've adapted our meetings. Every meeting has been an adaptation from our previous meeting, including the last one we just had. Because the thing that I want to do is our role is to provide a forum where our members can discuss and deliberate on industry-wide issues. So, and we want discussion, even if that discussion doesn't result in things that I necessarily agree with. That to me is secondary.
Right.
The important thing is that the members feel like they traveled all this way, and they had their chance to say their piece, and something happens because of it.
And how about generational adaptation? We talked a little bit about societal and technology, but Gen Z that's rising into junior management roles in many organizations, certainly millennials and Gen X, like we are, all approach things differently. And we probably have a bias toward face-to-face meetings. Millennials may have a bias toward, texting. Gen Z may have a bias toward a different sort. Do you offer opportunities for that? Like, do you have Slack channels that folks can jump into to talk about different topics, or how do you accommodate different generational preferences?
So we don't have Slack channels. We are a small staff. We have 3 full-time staffers right now. And our staff is 2 Gen Xers and a boomer. And, but one of the things I never thought, when you asked me when I got into this industry in 20 years ago, that I would be texting board members, on their personal phone, I never thought that. But that happens all the time. I mean, and occasionally I've gotten texts over the weekend. Right. And guess what? I text them back. So I think the other thing that's kind of gone by, one of the ways we accommodate that is that the whole notion of the traditional 9 to 5, 8 to 5, whatever, office hours, and you can never contact me afterwards, that's gone too. It's much more fluid. It's much more, I wouldn't say 24/7, but I've had emails come in, fairly late into the evening, and I respond back. And, especially if I'm dealing with people in other parts of the country or other countries altogether. So I think that's one way that we deal with it. With the modes of communication, texting is no problem. Or if they want to jump on a Teams call that second, okay, let's do it.
Right.
The other thing is I will go out, see them if that's what they want. I think that's something that my members pay me to do that. And I'm happy to do it. But, I think we'll meet them where they want to meet us. But it's again, I'm very fortunate because my members, they want to meet me halfway anyway, which is also very, I'm gratified by that.
But how do you foment exchanges intergenerationally between members? So in other words, the boomer founder of a building products company and the Gen Z marketing quickly rising marketing star from another company. They speak very different languages, but they need to figure out how to connect. Does the association do anything to foster that?
I think in our meetings, what we do, and this is kind of a trade association best practice 101 thing that I follow. I actually have some slides and some decks once in a while where it's just you have the topic at hand, and then just underneath it, there's a bullet. What do you think? And I literally go around the room and I'll ask everybody around the table what they think. And then I'll even ask people in the stands what they think. And, when some people feel perhaps a little nervous to ask a question, if I can read the room well enough to know that I think that may be happening, I certainly don't mind, or my staff doesn't mind saying something fairly self-deprecating fairly quickly to kind of break the ice a little bit, so people know that, okay, this is a forum where you can speak your mind, no matter what it is. And I, the word tone, I think, matters a lot. You have to have an environment where it's okay to say things even if other people may not agree with them or they may not understand them. I mean, one of the things that I know is that I'm not a very technical person, and here I am in my technical and research working group, and I'm working with people who worked in this industry for over 30 years, so they'll know more than I ever will. So once in a while, I know I'm asking a question that they probably think I should know the answer to. But I preface it by saying, okay, I'm going to ask you all something that I should know the answer to, but I don't. And they're okay with it.
So you come from two very different professional backgrounds. You've got regulatory and policy, and you've got marketing. I've never heard of an association leader that has that combination. I've never stopped to think much about their background. How do you find that infuses your thinking on what the association needs to do and emphasize, and programs and resource allocation and things like that?
I never thought that it would be helpful at first, because it is kind of, the juxtaposition doesn't make sense at first take. But I've actually found it to be quite helpful, because when you look at marketing as a discipline, the P's and the C's and all that, prioritization becomes pretty important pretty fast, and so does segmentation and messaging. And certainly, on the creative side of it, you have to be able to package what you're saying in a way that's compelling and makes sense. So in that sense, even if I'm not spending money on a marketing sense, it does kind of give me the thinking that, wow, the members that we have at EMA better know what we're about and where we're going and why, if we want this thing to work. So one of the things that we did when I first came on board is that we redid we had a draft strategic plan that was kind of floating around during COVID, and it never got adopted. And one of the first things I did, and the board supported it full tilt, which was great, was we need to redo the plan, soup to nuts, and we need to figure this out. And we got a very high-powered strategic planner in the association space. And the result of that was we all not only had a firm belief or firm direction where we're going and why, but we also blew up our governance structure and have a brand new working group structure, and also resulted in a new due structure as well, or a revised due structure. And the thinking behind all of that is that we actually were able to expand our scope from being basically a technically focused trade association to one that leverages our technical know-how and chutzpah, which I don't have, as I just said, to also include advocacy and communications.
Got it.
So it's helped a lot. And what's interesting in the industrial space, manufacturers don't spend a lot on marketing. Okay?
You think?
They just don't. And I said that to my members here and my former employer at that association. And the Census Bureau has a ton of data that spells all of this out. And I remember looking at it, I was like, wow, manufacturing as an industry spends less than 0.5% of their net sales on advertising and promotion. And there are reasons for that. Most of it's B2B. And frankly, the capital expenditures needed to make stuff is just really, really high. And you don't need to, we're not selling sugar, right? Or we're not selling flour. But what's also amazing to me is, okay, if you want to distinguish yourself as a brand or as a category, you actually have to emphasize that at some point. And you look at King Arthur flour, for example. You go there, they charge 50% more than the store-bought flour. But why do people go buy it? Because they're thinking, wow, this is the premium product and all of that kind of thing. So a lot of it's education too. And I do feel quite fortunate that I can speak to some of our members about marketing and advertising, and and I can speak to them about it with confidence, and then that's helped quite a bit. So
interesting.
It's helped a lot.
So before we get too far ahead, you've touched a little bit on email. You talked about staff size, but tell us more about the organization, the membership and that kind of thing.
So the membership we have several membership classes. We have some members that pay well over six figures in dues a year. And those are East manufacturers. We've got several major ones now. But it's not something that people off the street will have heard of or consumers would have heard of. The only one that people, let's say from New England, may have heard of is Drive It. That's a major member, but we have others, Stowe and Sika and Masterwall, and we have a Canadian manufacturer, Adex. And then we've got associate manufacturers because Eaves is a multi-layered exterior cladding system. So that the Eaves manufacturers put the stuff together, or make it so that the installers can put it together. But then you have associate manufacturers that supply many of the raw materials that go into the finished product. So we have Dow, we've got Walker, we've got Georgia Pacific, and we've got some tool companies that provide tools for Eaves, like Windlock is one, Ames Taping Tools is another one. Clark Dietrich's one, and I'm probably missing one, and I feel badly if I am. But we've got several of those. And then we've got distributors. And some of our distributors are multi-billion-dollar companies.
Well,
L&W Supply is a multi-billion-dollar company. We're part of a multi-billion-dollar company. Gypsum Management Supply is part of a multi-billion-dollar company. So, and they've got several hundred outlets throughout the country. So they're kind of the wholesale version of Lowe's or Home Depot. And then we have contractors, and they're the ones who install the materials. Most of our contractor members are commercial, so they're the ones who install Eaves on the latest Wynn Resort or something like that, or the Hampton Inn, not your small strip mall necessarily, and things on the residential code. And then we've got several supporters and affiliates. So the wall and ceiling contractor organizations that we have, several of them are members, as well as the trade union we deal with, the cement plasterers union. It's called OPCMIA, which is actually the oldest building trades union in the country, 1864, I believe.
Well,
and then we've got several hundred architect supporters too. So kind of, I would say we run the whole value chain in what we do.
But if I understood you correctly, you're saying that you've got associations that are members of the association.
Yes.
Wow, that's interesting.
Absolutely.
I never thought about that. That's very meta.
Well, we actually rent office space from the wall and ceiling contractor organization. And we find that to be a fabulous arrangement because we've actually found ways to work together.
Right.
And they are all about contractor education. So the contractor education curriculum that we offer, they're the ones who did it. And they've been doing it for 20, 25 years. And we support it wholeheartedly. And so, and because they're in our office, in our collective office, it's a great way for us to collaborate and do things like that. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, let's come back to the marketing topic.
Yes, sir.
You found your way into the association space in a marketing role, coming off of Madison Ave.
Right.
So it was kind of although from the outside it looks like a fairly sharp departure, for you, it was just a natural extension of what you were doing. But what I find, as you mentioned earlier, in the industrial space, contemporary marketing approaches are often poorly executed. I mean, a lot of folks running these companies grew up in an era where marketing was Yellow Pages ad and Thomas Register. Have you seen effective association approaches that have helped these very traditional companies figure out how to embrace new marketing opportunities?
Yes, I certainly went out. I would say, in my former place of employment, I helped devise a digital consumer marketing program, advertising program that was entirely online, and that was effective in helping generate interest and preference among the younger generations for the product. So, and it can happen. But how do you? So the question is, how do you make that happen? I think the trick there, and I would say this for any association, is you have to have buy-in from your membership that this is something they want to do.
But if they don't think it's important to begin with, then how do you build the buy-in?
Yeah, well, if they don't think it's important, the answer is you won't. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And again, I think in many cases, if you have a couple of members who think, well, we do it all ourselves and we're fine with it, then it's probably not going to get off the ground. So you may have to wait a while. And in that case, you had one huge, you had a couple of big players in the exterior cladding space who were spending just gobs of money each year in marketing and advertising. And one of the things that we did to get some of the buy-in was like, hey, there's no way any of you individually can tackle this.
Right.
If you pool your resources, you still won't go 1-to-1, but you'll have a much better shot than you're having now. So I think that, again, it harkens back to finding something that the members either can't or won't do for whatever reason, and finding that sweet spot that they, and as you pointed out at the outset, something that they find of value,
right,
and then bring it to fruition. So in our case, yes, because of my prior experience, I was able to, help shepherd through and hire a first-rate marketing and advertising firm. We did the focus group research, which was great. And so we made sure that we had the right messaging, we had effective creative and really good media placement, and it worked. And I think the one difference we did counter to what many people typically do during COVID, which is that we did not only did we not cut back during COVID, but we, where we could, increased the emphasis, because at that point, all the consumer behavior was showing that people were sitting at home,
right,
surfing the internet. What else are they going to do? So you might as well take advantage of that. And that in that case, it kind of worked to our advantage.
A few months ago, we had a conversation about advocacy. And one of the things you mentioned to me is that, of course, members see if you've got a win. You can describe the win and they see that and they understand how you've added value. But a lot of times you're putting a ton of effort into protecting them. So in other words, staving off changes, which would create a headwind for them if they ever came to pass, but they don't because of your efforts. But that's much harder to quantify and articulate for people and they don't appreciate it. How do you overcome that?
It's funny you mentioned that. At one of my first meetings in Atlanta, I said, advocacy is almost impossible to measure via your traditional classic ROI computations. But when something goes badly, you know it.
Right.
And it's murky. You can't be precise about it. But boy, when it works, it's great, and when it doesn't work, it's not good at all.
Right.
We were lucky at EMA. We had a big fight last summer in Minneapolis, and the planning, some planning commission staff in the city of Minneapolis wanted to ban EIFs. They had been wanting to do it for years, and it kept going through the process, going through the motions, and they actually convinced the planning commissioners of the city of Minneapolis to kind of go along with this. And then we got wind of it. in 23 and 2023 at our annual meeting in Palm Springs. And so we got involved and we had our advocacy folks come on board, and we developed a very strong advocacy program where we had a really good set of messaging, and a really strong coalition. And those are two of the most key things that you need in advocacy. And it worked. And when we won, oh wow, because what we were able to do, and yes, I'm selling us a little bit right now, and I'm being shameless about it, but I'll just say that what we did is that we actually went from a situation where the planning commissioners had voted 9-0 or whatever it was, a shutout, to ban us, to a complete total reversal.
Right.
Where we got a shutout of approving our product lock, stock, and barrel. Now, the key to advocacy for an association, and I said this to them then, and I would say it to anybody now, is especially in a staff of 3, I can't do it by myself.
Right.
Okay. Even though I flew out to Minneapolis several times and testified a couple times, can't do it. You need the members involved. But when you've got, in our case, in our last couple of meetings, when you've got every major manufacturer or 3 of the 4 major manufacturers in the country, and people there from those manufacturers testifying, when you've got people from the local lath and plaster bureau and local contractors testifying, and then, as luck would have it, in the University of Minnesota won the solar decathlon the year before for an EIFS design of a retrofit project. So we got wind of that, and we invited the professor to come testify, and he came and testified. And then when you have not 1, not 2, but 3 building trades unions and the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota come in and testify, in a state like Minnesota, which we know is as blue as your shirt, and as my blazer, that's probably going to have a positive impact, and it did. So, and that was good.
So not just kind of setting the meetings on Capitol Hill, but really thinking about coordinating a broad effort with multiple stakeholders and operating at the municipal and state level as well, as you said earlier.
Absolutely. And I think that was another proof positive of the fact that this is, when you had something like that going on, this is where the industry played a role. Because I think that, what industrial manufacturer is going to want to hire their own lobbyists? Although one did. I couldn't believe they did, which was fabulous. And their lobbyists worked with our lobbyists, and it helped a ton.
Sure.
But that's pretty unusual. But most of the time, unless you're Walmart or something, or a major corporation, many industrial manufacturers are not going to have a lobbying function at the ready.
Right.
And their association can help with that.
So speaking of regulatory issues, we're about a third of the way now through the 9 weeks between the presidential election and change in administration as we record this today. How do you see trade associations navigating what seems like some significant potential changes in the business and regulatory climate?
Many manufacturers are probably going to be happier about some of the changes if there's going to be more emphasis on fewer regulations. But I think many of us actually don't know either. And I think what's interesting is that my job is to work with whichever administration is in control. And so I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say waiting and seeing, but also kind of being prepared for whichever path it can go down. I think one thing is it's going to be hard for things to happen immediately, regardless of whether the desire there is there or not. I mean, just the federal government is just a huge beast.
Sure.
And but it'll be interesting. And one thing that we're looking at, EMA, is that we actually got selected for a major federal grant by the EPA in the summer. And it was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was a $2.2 million grant for us. And we're still kind of working on the on the phase between selection and the award, because there's a process and processes you have to go through. But we're both EMA and the EPA are working very, very hard to get to that next phase very, very quickly. Because the EPA is something that was a huge priority of the Biden-Harris administration, and probably won't be as much of a priority with the presumptive Trump administration. But it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, it'll be
so I work a lot with capital equipment manufacturers, often selling into food companies and other places that have to worry about emissions and fugitive dust and things like that. And one of the things that I've seen is many projects that die because a plant is currently grandfathered into their air quality. I don't know what the terminology is, but the EPA says, yes, okay, you've met the requirements. And now that becomes the threshold that you have to maintain going forward, unless you do some sort of a significant change. And often adding another line or a significant disruption on a line constitutes that significant change, which then means the entire building has to be brought up to an entirely new level in a way that's not feasible. And so, yeah, we'd like to invest in this plant. Yes, we've got a great workforce. Yes, there's value in being in this community. We just can't justify the cost of completely retrofitting the entire plant in order to put in a new line. So my selfish interest on behalf of my clients is I'm hoping that there'll be some relaxation of some of that EPA requirement that will let companies invest prudently in improving their operation and growing productivity and creating more new jobs and producing efficiently and sustainably and all that kind of stuff without a huge expense that gets in the way of it.
Oh, I mean, that would be ideal. I mean, if some of that happens, because that's very true. And certainly in the construction space that I deal with, and certainly in housing, we're still catching up from the Great Recession.
Right.
We're still hundreds and hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of thousands of housing units short of where we normally would be. So, you're absolutely right about that, and that would be great. And it's always a shame when you hear stories like that, because you do hear them, and it's very tough because, and what I always say on the environmental front is, especially for people who are very idealistic about clean air and the clean environment. And what I say to them is, you actually want manufacturing to take place here. You want it in the United States, because we have so many rules and regulations in place for worker safety, for environmental cleanliness already, that, and we're not the only country like that. There are many other what I call first world countries like that, and other parts of the world have that too. But we are definitely one place you want to do that. One thing that could be interesting for us is the cost of fuel for us is historically cheap compared to other countries. So, and if some of those prices can come down a little bit, or at least not go up for a long time, that could help us a lot.
A huge competitive advantage for energy intensive industries.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I like to say is, it's one reason why I think it's a reason why we sell by the gallon and not the liter. I mean, because if you bought gas by the gallon in Europe, I know they don't use that measurement, but man, it would be expensive.
Right. Yeah. I read an interesting book by Oren Cass a couple years ago that talked about some of the EPA regulations and the impact on business. And he made some interesting kind of connections for me that I wasn't aware of, that actually the ratchet every year requires that the emissions are further and further and further reduced. And we're at a point now where they're already so small that the ability to continue to reduce them is quite limited. And actually, I forget the exact numbers, but only 2 or 3 American cities had any higher particulate matter in the air than the finest European cities that we think of as paragons of sustainability and environmentalism. And so the U.S. is really in a very strong position, to the point that you make. If we can just unleash some of those animal spirits while keeping things in a good way, that could be a really exciting time.
Oh, no question that we're like that. I mean, it's just as as you probably remember, my father was a Ford dealer. Right. And I can tell you that the car, even the internal combustion cars that are built today versus the Ford LTD of 1975, they're, first of all, before the catalytic converter, I mean, the amount of emissions and that it was multiples of what it is today. And
it's funny you say that. Occasionally I'll go to a parade and there'll be, classic cars in the parade, and my eyes water from the exhaust, and it's like being in a NASCAR race. You realize, imagine when that was all the cars on the road. It's pretty crazy.
Oh no, it's absolutely crazy. And it, and some cities have done things that that may seem a little over the top. For example, I mean, you can't have a wood burning fireplace in a new building in New York City anymore. Can't do it,
right?
Because of you could understand you can't have grills in your porch either, and you get that with the population density,
right?
But when they were talking about the particulate matter of the wood emissions, and then when you actually find out in New York City, if you look at the particulate matter on a year-long basis, and you found out that wow, there's more particulate matter in the summer than there is in the winter, and you don't burn fires in the summer. So what gives?
Or the particulate matter that's coming off the additional tire wear on heavier electric vehicles. I mean, there's all kinds of places we could go with that conversation. But
sure,
let's come back to trade associations.
Yes, sir.
How can association engagement help a mid-career or younger leader in their professional development?
If you want, I would say the networking opportunity is pretty obvious. I mean, it's one way. One could say you could find your next job at one of these meetings without even knowing. But it may have a bit of an incubation period for something like that to happen. But I think just getting a sense of what's going on. But I think the other thing for the junior to mid-career folks, and we're seeing this now, we've got some eager, I mean, it's interesting. We have actually many young people on our working group structure. And some of them are working hard and distinguishing themselves in a very positive way for the contributions they're making. And I think that, that gets them noticed in the industry,
right?
But that also helps them gain an understanding of what the industry is about. And I think that can be a very good thing. I mean, for us, we've got several working groups. We've got the promotion working group. We've got 2 advocacy working groups, one that's very technical for building codes, one that's for federal, state, and local. And then we've got an education and workforce development working group. And what I'm very pleased to see is we've got some, on several of these working groups, you've got the kind of the old guard, if you will, sitting next to the young up and comers, and seeing them kind of just converse with each other once they break through the generational language barrier.
Right.
And it's great to see that, but I think it just helps them get more engaged in the industry, and because it is easy to not go to a meeting.
Sure.
It's easy, save money, save time, all that good stuff. And we also do one thing a little bit counter too, and not everybody's happy with it. For the I don't know if this is the second or third meeting in a row, we don't have a Zoom capability for the meeting. Okay, we don't offer it. We did. And with a small staff association like ours, it was very difficult for me to manage running an in-person meeting with some people on the screen.
Right.
So now it's either you're in, or one of your colleagues can give you a recap when they get back.
Got it.
But anyway.
So that touches on the kind of the resource investment that's required beyond dues. I mean, if you're going to provide a rule of thumb for an actively engaged executive leading a typical association member company, how many hours per year should they plan on investing to maximize the benefit?
I'm just going to give probably between 5 and 10 hours a month.
Okay. And
then 2 sets of meetings, which would total would be 5 business days or 6. And I think that's what it would take. And I'm including the periodic working group teams / Zoom calls.
So about 2.5 weeks out of the year.
Yeah.
Or what does that work out to? One 125th or 5% of their time, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you mentioned the grant, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you was about grants. I recently spoke with Mickey Vanderloo for an episode of the podcast. She specializes in helping manufacturers win grants. You had that big win. What's the role of an association? Obviously, yours was the association winning the grant, and you'll have those funds on behalf of members. But is there a role of an association in helping members understand the grant opportunities that they could be going after as well?
I think there is. I think there is. I mean, for us, certainly we when we became aware of the grant, I had to get approval to go after it. At this time, I think bigger association probably give if they see opportunities, you go to grants.gov or something like that.
Right.
And you can find out what's going on there. They can let their members know these could fit you for here, and here. But for us, we focus on what the industry opportunity and benefit could be. That's what we threw all. In fact, the first day of our meetings this week was I call it Grant Day, and we had several meetings that focused on the grant because we're still in the very beginning stages of it. The interesting thing, yes, individual companies can go for grants, and the grant opportunity, we were one of 38 entities that got it. I think a couple of private companies did get a grant, along with some educational academic institutions and local governments. I will say that if for a trade association like ours, we're pretty well set up to deal with that, because the argument we were able to present, which was accepted, was like, we're acting on behalf of the entire industry. So if we're able to use the funds, then we're going to get everybody as opposed to just somebody.
Right. Force multiplier.
Yeah. So exactly.
So I've been thinking mostly, and my questions mostly been from the member angle, but you mentioned earlier a variety of different stakeholders. And so there are companies associated with that are members of your association that aren't the manufacturers. It feels like that's a big opportunity for companies to engage with an association in a different capacity. Maybe as an influencer or another stakeholder. Is that common, or is that relatively unique to associations to be so welcoming and broad in their membership?
It's common. I don't know if it's taken advantage of as much as you think it would be, but it is. Yeah, I would say it's not uncommon. I think in our particular case, we cover the entire value chain. That may be a little uncommon,
okay.
Especially for such a small group. But we do. But I think no, and I think the benefit to the folks that aren't directly manufacturers, they like to know what's going on like anybody else.
Right.
And in fact, a couple of our board members are associate manufacturers. We've got somebody from Dow, and we've got somebody from Saint-Gobain Adforce. And, and they make components or ingredients for components, but they like to know, okay, this industry is important to us. There are other industries that are important to them. But by being able to participate in the association, they get a very good sense of what the industry, how they're doing, and where they're going, and what they're going to focus on.
And so what about being a member of multiple associations? I mean, again, going to my common space with, say, process and packaging equipment manufacturers would be a good example. They have a large trade association themselves on either side of that, the process equipment or the packaging machinery. But they often also sell into various industries. Food, for instance, is a huge focus industry of companies in those spaces. And then there are various food trade associations. And then there's, food safety, and there's food distribution, and there's, the snack food or the candy association. So there's many ways to triangulate. How many associations is reasonable to be part of?
Oh, gosh. I would say, as long as you're a member of ours, I don't care. But I don't want to say that. But we do. I mean, there is a friendly sort of competition, I guess, if you will, between associations, because everybody's competing and knowing what it takes to make an association work. We're not just competing for dues dollars, but we're also competing for time and attention.
Yeah, I mean, if it takes 2 weeks of engagement to really be part of it, and you're a member of 4 organizations, and suddenly there goes 2 months out of your year. I mean, that's tough.
Sure.
Now, obviously, you can split that across different managers or whatever in the organization, but it is a resource commitment.
Yes, it is a resource commitment. So I think that obviously the big companies are members of many associations, and the smaller ones are not. And I think that the key is you have to, what we say for our part of our value proposition is that if you or your company have a vested interest in a vibrant EIFS industry, and that is important to you and your business, then we're worth belonging to. Now, obviously, if that's not part of it, then the answer would be no. So I think a lot of these folks have to pick and choose, and figure out what's most important to them, and it sounds like for the candy and the snack food, that sounds like that's pretty far down the chain, because then you're getting to the consumer and all of that, and maybe that's important, maybe that's not. But
in a world where Ozempic is changing consumption habits, understanding what's going on with that strikes me as it would be pretty important, because the companies making the machines that get sold into those factories are really hostage to the consumer consumption habits.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's at the very least, it's very good to be aware of what's going on with a lot of this. And a lot of these associations print some pretty compelling statistics that you can, that don't take the 10 hours. I would say that the people who don't have the time, okay, you don't get the 10 hours a month and the two meetings a year, but you can still get a lot of information just by seeing the printed materials that come through, reading the industry statistics and whatever else they publish and things like that. So there's, there's a reason to still have a hand in it. Right. It's important to you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know a lot of associations ask members for feedback, and most of those requests for feedback probably go unanswered, back to that 80-20 sort of a thing. But what trends are you seeing members with interest in that are outside of your specific domain? Like, are you hearing from people, cybersecurity? We got to figure out how the association can help us with cybersecurity or social media or topics like that?
Somewhat, a little bit with social media. I think that the interesting thing is, and I think this helped with our strategic plan, is that we're pretty focused on EIFS and all things related to EIFS, not as much in business processes and operations in general. But we are aware of things, and there are a lot of things that we do as an association that in some ways are playing catch up to them. Because we just redid our software package last year, and or in the past year, and when we told them, we were running off of 3 databases and all, they were like, "You're kidding." Right. And I'm like, "No," but I think it depends. If you're not, for a small group that wants to maintain focus, it's probably going to be focused on the industry you represent more than anything else. I mean, they're not coming to EMA to get a deal with a rental car agency.
Sure, but do they come for best practices on talent management? I mean, that's been a huge issue for industrial manufacturers, how to find enough people that will show up and do quality work and come back every day, which is certainly outside of the building envelope, but critical to their business.
Yes. Not necessarily that. Where they've come back to us is on insurance and what it takes to get good insurance, and what are the factors to do that. And that's kind of a work in progress for us right now. So they definitely do that with us. Certainly, I would say on the advocacy side, and we actually just had this meeting earlier this week. It's one of the things that I said to our members is, it would be a pretty good idea for all of you to know in your headquarters, for your, at least, if not your national congressional representative, at least your state rep and state senator, to know who you are. to know your company and to take a little time to like send them some material or all that kind of stuff. So they do come to us for best practices for that. So we did give our members an effective guide to lobbying, and not for us, but for them.
Right. Yeah, run a manufacturing day event and invite all the representatives to come and get a press release and all that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I've got my manufacturing day hat on.
I love it. I love it. Yes. Now, that what was that, October, I believe? Something like that?
I think always the first Friday in October, if I remember correctly.
Yep. So that was, and it's great. And I think one of the things, too, is that manufacturing, to most people, they don't understand how an important part of our economy it is. And I would even go so far as to say, from a workforce perspective, manufacturing was a key component of creating the middle class, right? I mean, it just was, and because those jobs, they're hard, but they pay well. It's a lot different than being a shift worker at a McDonald's or something like that.
But they're also very different than they were 50 years ago. People have this idea of you come home pitch black like you came out of a coal mine. And I mean, in many cases, you're working with cobots now in a clean room area. So it's a very different sort of an environment than people may picture.
Yes, and they're fewer people. It's much more much more in the robotics and all that. So when I visit plants, what surprises me is you have this very substantial floor space, and you'd expect to have hundreds of people milling around, and you don't at all.
Right.
It's so highly automated. But you're absolutely right. The manufacturing of today isn't the manufacturing of old at all, and it's much more high tech than that. Yeah.
A lot of industries are seeing a huge wave of PE roll-ups or strategic acquisitions and roll-ups.
Sure.
Do trade associations play any role in kind of not overseeing or regulating that, but helping companies navigate what ends up being a very different sort of a business environment with that kind of consolidation?
We're actually more on the receiving end of that.
Okay.
And where we get challenged is consolidations result in consolidation of dues and things like that. What we do have, and it's about to hit that time of the year again, where I get investment banks call me all the time and start asking me for industry statistics and insight and things like that when there are companies considering an acquisition of another country or a stake in it or something like that. And we do somewhat play a part in that, but it also depends on how public the members want their information. We don't release our shipment data or sales data publicly, so that's for our members' benefit. So, but what I like to do when investment houses call, I never like to just say no, because that I don't think that's helpful either. But typically you can provide some data, especially from government sources that can give some insight on what's going on and things like that. But anyway, we do see a lot of that.
So let's take this out of the theoretical and make it more personal. Sure. Sitting where you are at the intersection of industry and manufacturing and business regulation, and having a couple children that are entering adulthood, from that seat that you have and that perspective, what advice are you going to give your kids about where you think career opportunities are going to be in the manufacturing related space?
Well, I think that manufacturing opportunities are absolutely, it's one thing when you look at the type of manufacturing we do here in the States, especially. We do a lot of the kind of the cutting edge, path breaking, high tech stuff, and then when it becomes a commodity, that's when you see it starting to go elsewhere. Typically, like let's take the television industry for example. I mean, you remember back in the day, Magnavox and Zenith and whatever, many of them used to be made here. And when we first met each other, if you had a Sony Trinitron, you were living large, and then. But now I think it's very hard. You'd be hard pressed to find an American in a television manufactured in the United States. It didn't cost an arm and a leg. Same with bicycles. That's another industry. You used to have many, many more made here. You still have some, but those are the high end bikes.
Right.
Those aren't the bikes you'd see at a big box store. So I would say the manufacturing opportunities are there. And I'll tell you where I think they're there. They're clamoring for smart people, and I think that if you want to go into manufacturing, you have to be willing, you have to be smart, you have to be willing to learn. And I'm not saying you have to have an advanced degree. I'm not saying that at all. You have to be willing to learn, and you have to be pretty nimble about it too, because uh, running a line or working on a line in a highly robotics intensive plant, that's very expensive equipment, and you better know what you're doing and not make mistakes. And if you can help it. The other place where I see real opportunity taking place, and then finally you see, I saw an article in the journal about it not too long ago. It's in the trades. You keep hearing about construction worker shortages in our space. And what I like to point out, you look at the census data, and there are more construction workers now than ever. And that includes the great housing boom in the 2007-8 time.
But if we're still millions of housing units behind, then we don't have enough.
Yes, we don't have enough. Exactly. And they're getting paid well. And with college tuitions, what they are today and all of that, there's a path forward to earn a good living. It can be a very lucrative living. And then, without going into debt right out of the gate.
Right.
So I think the opportunity is there. I mean, one of the, I personally am very optimistic about what's going on here in the U.S. from an economic standpoint, because if things go really, really poorly, for any length of time here in the U.S., there are other problems to worry about than the economy. That's kind of how I personally look at things. Because now, will there be another recession? Of course, there will be other. But we just came out of a global pandemic, and we've recovered. Certainly construction has recovered, and it's not every. I think the restaurant industries had may still have some challenges from that. I don't know, but we're very resilient, and we always have been, and we are kind of the land of opportunity in that sense. And I think that there's a huge amount of opportunities in whatever you want to do. I think people are worried about AI, right? Oh, they're going to take my job. And yes, some jobs will be displaced. I don't know what. I mean, people don't have secretaries or stenographers like they used to. I mean, There's still some around in courtrooms and things like that, but it's not the same that it was. But I also look at these new technologies bring about new opportunities for new jobs.
Well, AI is a great example. I'm glad you brought that up. That's my next question. How are associations using AI? How could they be? How should they be? What innovations are you hearing about? And then how should associations be advising or helping their members to adopt AI themselves?
Great question. And right now, it's like a lot of it's a work in progress.
Sure.
I'll tell you where we use AI. I mean, it's a great way to start a draft for something like,
your annual meeting agenda.
Yeah. Or how about a marketing plan?
Right.
I mean, you can, if you know how to use AI properly, you can get a marketing plan in 5 minutes, not even. And it's not going to be perfect. I think what you're going to have to, what people are going to have to caution about with AI is not leaning on it too heavily. And I think that it's like that with anything. You can't lean on it too heavily. I mean, there is that human experiential element where somebody who knows what they're doing and has the experience, they're still going to know a lot. I think AI can be a great way to help people get started with things and maybe to save time with it, but it's not necessarily going to result in a better product at the end.
Sure.
Whatever that is.
Are there any resources, and this is a needle in a haystack, I've got a feeling, because most resources are going to focus on an industry, but I'm wondering if there's anything you can point listeners to, authoritative blogs or a YouTube channel or podcast or something that talks about how to optimize or maximize your association membership. Anything like that?
I've done Google searches. It's not new. There was a fabulous article in Forbes 5 or 6 years ago that answered that question head on. And it was a fabulous And if I remember correctly, the author was one of those folks who was not super convinced about the value of trade associations until they went to their first meeting. I don't know if they were told to go or they all of a sudden they were encouraged to go, but then they were like, oh, wow.
What a great story. Maybe if I can impose on you to shoot me the link, I'll add that link to the show notes.
Sure. Absolutely. I think that's, the blogs that I look at, I think, yes, you could look at Harvard Business Review and things like that. They may have something like that, but modern business, modern business publications have things like that. I mean, sometimes associations get into the press, like the Journal or the mainstream news media, and sometimes it's not for the greatest reasons. Sometimes it's for good reasons. I look at ASAE. That is my trade association. It used to be called the American Society of Association Executives. And I think they've got a free blog. They certainly, and a lot of these entities, if they're on LinkedIn or especially LinkedIn, you can find out what's going on with that.
Do they have a podcast?
I don't know.
Should trade associations be sponsoring or running podcasts and offering that as an outlet for their members, or packaging up advice on how their members could start them?
I think that's a great possibility. I think certainly that's a possibility. We offer, we're actually going to be hosting through another party a podcast towards architects, which is a key target audience for us.
Right.
The week after Thanksgiving.
Great.
But sometimes they're done internally by the association we share office space with does that periodically. But no, I think those are good things. Blogs, I'll tell you, blogs, I think they've sort of come and gone largely, because people used to write them and there are no comments ever, ever. Where we see a lot of value is, frankly, LinkedIn is like that's the big social media channel we see right now.
Right.
X to a smaller degree. The other, Facebook, no. I mean, we're there because it's more defensive. I think we feel we have to be.
I would think Instagram would have some potential for you.
It could. It could if we concentrated more, and I would like to at some point, on the aesthetic features of our buildings and showcasing great buildings. Absolutely.
Looking out 10 years, what do you think the role and value of trade associations will be? Is it the same as now with just some kind of incremental linear progression, or is it something radically different?
I think the principles will remain, which is doing things for industries and for the members in those industries that they can't or won't do for whatever reason on their own. I think what those could be, who knows?
Right.
I think advocacy will still be a part of it. Yes, market statistics, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something completely new out there that I can only imagine. And I wasn't in the association world, when the internet came online, but holy moly, that must have been just a world changer when all of that, So, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some incredible disruptor that we're not even aware of yet that's going to come down the pike.
Like your Mars chapter.
Yes. Yes. Our Mars chapter with, our products shipped by Tesla trucks everywhere, right? So, yeah.
What question would you love to have a prospective member ask you, but nobody has ever asked?
That they, gosh.
That would feel like a validation of your career's work.
Tell me something you could have done that I couldn't have done for myself. Or your association has done that we couldn't do ourselves that help us directly. And fortunately, we've got, in EMA's world, we've got two things that we can hit on in the last year to answer that question directly. It's a very concrete answer to your question, I know. But on the advocacy side, yes, when you flip a situation in a major city like Minneapolis, that's a win. And then getting this grant, getting selected for this grant, that's a big one. And I remember when I was telling our board members that we got it, I think it took a little while to register that it actually happened. When I got the letter on the Friday night from the EPA, because I didn't hear anything for months, and then I just, I'm sitting at home, kitchen table, Friday night with my wife. We're just, having dinner and then watching whatever it is on Netflix, and then I see this email come through from this .gov site address that I never got. It was a letter. It's just like, oh my gosh. So that's the kind of thing that's big for us. And but I also realize those things don't happen all the time.
Sure.
So be happy when you get it, but you can always work towards it.
Right.
And I think those are good things.
All right. This may be a distinction without a difference, but there's also kind of a chicken and the egg thing here. I'm thinking that, everyone says that you have to get engaged to get value out of the membership.
Right.
But I'm wondering, how do you convince people to get engaged until they've experienced the value?
It's hard. Sometimes you have to do the loss leader approach, right? I mean, in Minneapolis, for example, we had many non-members in the room, and I met them, and I couldn't have been nicer. And I said, I need your help. I need your support. All of this. What was interesting in Minneapolis is there was several non-members who tried to start it first to solve this on their own, and for whatever reason they were having a hard time doing it. So when we came in and got the whole industry behind it, that I think that convinced some of the value, and still surprised a lot of them. But in that case, and with the case with the EPA grant, we deliberately included non-members in the grant. In fact, I said to the EPA in our grant application, so we've got 4 major non-member manufacturers in our membership, and there are 5 non-member manufacturers. Some of them are quite a bit smaller, also not in membership, but I'm including them in the grant. And that was interesting, talking to our board about it and all of that. And our last set of meetings was also interesting because the board approved a new grant working group. And we had 3 of those non-member manufacturers at our meetings. And now they didn't go to every meeting we had. They only went to the open meetings and the dinner that we had. But, I think that's sometimes you have to take that step of introducing the value and then getting, ultimately that should bear some fruit.
Right.
But no, you're right. Because what's in it for you? Right. And it's just, because it's hard for me to say to someone, hey, could you write a check for $50,000? Right. Just, what's in it for me? And I understand that.
So if you convene members into working groups to develop best practices, then I'm wondering from the selfish perspective of a company, if that doesn't become counterproductive, because now the best practice that you may be adopting or implementing or innovating yourself and you're sharing it, now what you're doing is kind of reverting to the mean as you bring others in your organization, other competitors, up to the same level as you. How can a company extract the value from that membership without, competitive risk or exposure?
So, well, certainly we have an attorney in the room, like all the meetings. That's one thing.
Sure.
So we have to make sure that the rules of the road are followed and all of that. But I also think that, the industry best practices are that they're and I've said this, and certainly when we did the marketing program at my former place of employment, and one of the things I said to them was, just because we're doing marketing doesn't mean that you shouldn't do your own marketing.
Right.
So to me, those efforts should be complementary, not competitive. And if they start getting competitive, and that can happen, then we have to look at it and try to figure out
then
how
you're trying to herd cats again.
Exactly. So what we try to do, and for example, we write these things, industry technical bulletins, and we just started that when I got on board. We have 6 now, and we have 5 more coming down the pike. And many of our members have similar things. But what the members have said to us is, you know what? an architect, and actually architects or building owners or engineers, frankly, in many cases, they want something from the industry rather than the individual company. So we give them the industry materials first, and then the company can follow up with their own materials. Well, this is how our product works, our system works. That frequently does happen. Yeah.
All right. As we come to the end here, how do folks connect with you if they're interested?
Well, you can certainly, I'm all over LinkedIn. There are many Stephen Searses. I'm the Stephen T. Sears, the Stephen with a PH.
Okay.
And I'm quite active on that, which is great. You can go to EIMA.com, EIMA.com. Those are the two primary ways to connect with me. And we're very eager to not just talk about EIFs, but also manufacturing, economic things, and things of that nature. So I would be pleased to talk to just about anybody.
Well, there's certainly this audience. So hopefully you'll have some interesting connections and conversations.
Yes.
Take us home with 2 minutes or 3 minutes on what you would say is the misunderstood potential and the benefit that industrial manufacturers may overlook in, failing to build deep trade association memberships and connections.
I think that the thing that and I understand it's always a business decision. It's an investment of time and an investment of resources, and I get it. And so do my counterparts and the associations that you all deal with. I'm sure they get that as well, just like I do. But I think that if you want to know what's going on and what's important to the industry as a whole, there's nothing like attending these meetings with your competitors 360 days of the other days of the year. But at these 5 days or whatever it is, they're your colleagues. Because the way we look at it, you all have competitors somewhere, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's, for us, it's building materials and exterior cladding, for example. Those 5 days of the year, I'm not worried about one EIFS manufacturer versus another. I'm worried about what's going on with fiber cement, what's going on with masonry, what's going on with concrete block and things like that. Those are frankly, sometimes we work with them, but sometimes frequently we don't. And that's what we've got to be concerned about and finding the common interests that we all have. Because frankly, in our case, quality control, workmanship, proper installation, that's important to everybody. And because the worst thing that we can have is a building failure. And we had that we had that several decades ago. We had some building failures that the product got fixed and all that. And so it's all fine, but you want to minimize that.
Right.
And I think that if you go to the associations and get involved, you can learn a lot, but also you can help a lot too. And just because you're helping the industry does not mean you're not helping yourself either, because the old adage, a rising tide raises all boats. Sure. It's a very real thing. I've always said to our members, wouldn't you rather have a smaller slice of a bigger pie than a bigger slice of a smaller pie? So that's kind of where it comes in.
Good stuff. Thank you for sharing years of wisdom. Everyone listening, do your part, like it, share it, comment on this episode, drop a comment or take a link and drop it in Stephen's LinkedIn feed and mention in a minute. And also, subscribe. If you get value out of these, please subscribe. Thanks for joining me, Stephen. And thanks everyone for listening to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast.
Thank you so much, Ed, for this opportunity. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.